Thank you so much. We want to close out the forum today. So we'll now turn to a high-level panel discussion on U.S. countermeasures to transnational repression. One of the first questions that we always get when people hear about this is, what can we do? What can we do? What can Congress do? And so I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for this discussion, Steve Rhodes, host of Capitol Report on NTD News, a fitting title for our next panel. Joining him are Professor Bob Destro, Representative Scott Perry, and Mr. Erping Zhang. Please come on stage for this discussion as we close out the forum. Thank you so much, and please give them a warm round of applause.
I want to thank our esteemed panel here. Congressman Perry, thanks so much for joining us.
Awesome to be with you.
Congressman Scott Perry has introduced the Falun Gong Protection Act. It is a piece of legislation that is the first of its kind that has real consequences for the Chinese Communist Party. It has made its way through the House of Representatives twice, passed twice unanimously with bipartisan support, and is now making its way through the Senate. And so it's a very significant piece of legislation. Thank you for that.
Appreciate it. And as you saw, Senator Cruz has co-sponsored or sponsored the companion legislation in the Senate. What I can't get anyone to do is help me with the CCP is a transnational criminal organization. We would like to label them a transnational criminal organization so we should prosecute them for all the evil things that they do and all the crimes that they commit.
And this was an impromptu visit, and we really appreciate you coming on stage with us, Congressman. I'm going to introduce our other panelists. We do have Ambassador Sam Brownback, who is online. If you can see him on your screen here, he was supposed to be with us, but had some weather issues that prevented his flight. So we greatly appreciate him still making it online. Ambassador Sam Brownback has served as the United States Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, a lifelong advocate of human dignity. He's led global efforts to defend faith communities targeted by authoritarian regimes, including the CCP's persecution of Falun Gong. Ambassador Brownback is also a former U.S. Senator, Governor of Kansas, and a recognized leader in advancing international religious freedom as a core pillar of U.S. foreign policy. And to my right is Professor Robert Destro. Dr. Destro is the former Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. He's also a professor of law at the Catholic University of America's Columbus School of Law, where he has taught constitutional law, civil rights, and human rights for over 3 decades. Dr. Destro has played a pivotal role in shaping U.S. policy on international religious freedom and was instrumental in exposing and responding to the CCP's campaign of forced organ harvesting. His work bridges academia, law, and diplomacy, and in defense of conscience and the rule of law. Professor Destro was also instrumental in saving the organ harvesting survivor who we saw on stage telling his story just moments ago. Thank you for that. And we have Mr. Erping Zhang. Mr. Erping Zhang is the spokesperson for Falun Gong and a founding voice in documenting and confronting the Chinese Communist Party's persecution campaign against Falun Gong. For over 2 decades, he has worked to expose disinformation and defend the rights of Falun Gong practitioners around the world. Mr. Zhang is a graduate of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, where he was an Edward Mason Fellow. So the esteemed panel, and please give them a round of applause. Mr. Zhang, I would like to start with you as the spokesperson of Falun Gong. As we approach July 20th, this is the 26th year, sadly, commemorating the persecution and those that have been persecuted and continue to be. Help us understand what changed on that day in 1999 and how Falun Gong went from being widely embraced to being violently persecuted.
First of all, I would like to thank First of all, I would like to thank the fellow panelists, distinguished supporters in Falun Gong over the years. It's a pleasure to be here to answer the question. Since July 20th, 1999, remarkable changes have taken place. It's almost day and night. I earlier had a communication with Ambassador Brownback that the Falun group is unusual in the fact that it was not persecuted at the very beginning when it appeared in China back in 1992. Unlike other Christian groups, independent groups, or political groups, the Chinese government has always perceived them to be the enemies of state for a variety of reasons. As a matter of fact, when Falun Gong first emerged in 1992, the Chinese regime started to endorse it and shower it with proclamations, awards of certificates, holding it for health benefits. So until the end of the 90s, Falun Gong has been growing very fast in China with the support of the government because the Chinese government thought this is a good health regime for improving public health. In fact, in February issue of 1999, on the US News and World Report, they interviewed the head of the Chinese Sports Commission, who claimed that there are 100 million, Qigong or energy practitioners that save 1,000 yuan per person. And if 100 million people practicing it, that's 100 billion yuan saved. And quote, the Prime Minister Zhu Rongji was happy about that, so the money can be, the country needs money now. And later, when they realized that Falun Gong is not just about the health regime, it comes with Buddhist principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. That's when the Chinese government decided, hey, this is not just about a health regime, health exercise, but it's really about a renaissance of the traditional Chinese culture, spiritual culture, traditional faith, and traditional values. And this really got the Chinese Communist Party reverting. And then so we need to put a stop on this because communist regime is an atheism. And this means that by reviving the traditional Chinese culture, values, spiritual life, that will be the end of the CCP regime, which is imported in the 1920s from former Soviet Union. So ever since then, from the part of soft power export to foreign countries, the Chinese consulate in New York used to organize seminars to promote Falun Gong as a health regime. And then when they realized that this is really a renaissance of traditional Chinese culture, especially spiritual life, then they started persecution on July 20th. And we've seen the reports of the persecution and the witness, testimonies today about how brutal, the people were treated in China. And as long as you sign a paper in China to resent, to give up the belief, to let you go from the labor camp, but we see thousands, millions of people refuse to do that because this means a lot to the individual because of personal faith. The principle of truthfulness, compassion, tolerance, though universal, but has a special bearing in China because the Buddhist school focuses on the cultivation of mind and body for compassion, for benevolence, whereas the Taoist school focuses on the cultivation of mind and body for truth, the ultimate truth, to become a true being. So this is why it's of a high nationalism. It's really a mainstream Chinese society. According to Chinese government, part of Chinese mainstream society. According to Chinese government figure that there's 100 million people doing the practice. Let's assume the population, Chinese population, is still 1.4 billion, which we know is not no longer than that. The Indian population surpassed that of the Chinese population. That means that every 1 of 14 persons in China is a Falun Gong practitioner. And this is dreadful for the Communist Party because you have Falun Gong practitioners across different walks, from different walks of life, in the military, in the government, in the, in the academia, and also in the workers' partners. So this is really, a revival of Chinese civilization prior to the communist regime. So this is why the Chinese government is so dreadful of this great movement.
I think Mr. Zhang raises a very important point when it comes to this particular persecution, is that Falun Gong is part of what they call the Han people. It is not an ethnic or regional group, and therefore it's stretched throughout the entire country and poses an even greater threat to the CCP in their eyes. Congressman Perry, talk to us about your legislation and just how impactful you think this will be if it ultimately gets passed and heads to the president's desk for signature.
Well, like I said, particularly focused on two pieces of legislation, one the Falun Gong Protection Act and one to designate the Communist Party of China as a transnational criminal organization. One has passed the House, the first has. Again, like I said, we've run it a couple times. We're waiting for action in the Senate. Of course, that provides for penalties for people that engage in human rights atrocities associated with Falun Gong and the oppression of the Chinese Communist Party. And it doesn't matter if, obviously, we can't reach out to the sovereign nation of China, but if you're conducting these activities in the United States of America or in conjunction with someone in the United States of America, and the Department of Justice can reach out and you can be in their jurisdiction, well, then we can prosecute you for those crimes. And of course, labeling the Chinese Communist Party as a transnational criminal organization would have sweeping impact, not only for intellectual property theft, but of course, all the human rights atrocities and anything involved in transnational criminal organization, including, as this young lady said, the terrorism that occurs by the Chinese Communist Party, and not only at home but abroad. So that would be, we would have the authority around the globe to deal with the crimes of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, some in America, some of my colleagues think that is a little far-reaching. I don't think it is. I think that China is run by a criminal organization known as the Chinese Communist Party, and you treat criminals like criminals no matter where they are. And the United States has a history of doing that. We just have to, we have to get right with that. And, if the NBA wants to succumb to the Chinese Communist Party, well, they can do that, but the rest of us don't have to.
To the congressman's points, when you really take a step back and put into perspective forced live organ harvesting, instead of just passing over that word and really put it into perspective, this is not a rogue actor. This is state-run.
Yeah, this is obviously, it is state-run. It is by design. It is. Most people can't think of anything more horrific, and there are few things that are more horrific. And I think that, quite honestly, most people around the country and around the globe just don't want to think about it because they can't imagine it's true. But obviously, it is true, and we didn't accept this in the 1930s and the 1940s, whether it was Stalin in Russia or whether it was Hitler in Germany. We didn't accept it. We haven't accepted it, whether it was Pol Pot in Cambodia or genocides that happened in Africa. The United States has always been a leader in saying that these things will not stand, and we cannot let our financial relationship with China stand in the way of doing the right thing. We cannot do that. There's no way to morally sleep at night knowing that these things are occurring, and yet we'd be willing to go shake hands with somebody in China, in the government, knowing that they know, and that are part of this institutionalized genocide of people solely for the things that they believe.
Professor Destro, to the truth of Mr. Chen, who showed us his scar today, you helped to rescue him, the only known survivor of Falun Gong practitioner of organ harvesting. What was that process like?
Well, it was tough. It was, I think we've got it. Can we hear? Okay. I heard the story and I thought, let's get somebody to look at it. And you don't realize that this was one of my first acts as assistant secretary. And somebody had told me, as an assistant secretary, you have a lot of authority. And the fact is you do. And so I just kept pushing people. And the resistance was enormous. But we eventually, I got people to look into it. We had to find out where he was in another country. I'm not going to name the country where it was at, but we had to extract it from the other country. The other country wasn't happy that he was there. Then we had to get him over here. We had to get him immigration status. And that just got him in the door. Then the question of how do you prove that he's actually a survivor? We had some of the best medical minds in the country looking at this. And I remember my one good friend at the Cleveland Clinic who took one look at that scar and he said, you could take anything out of that scar. So it really is a horrific situation. I'm honored to have been able to use whatever authority I had, to get him out. But I want you to think of the big picture here. The big picture is you are all commodities. You're not just slaves. Remember, this is a chop shop we're talking about. You're actually worth more in pieces than you are as a person. And that's the government that our country is dealing with. And so if you don't understand that as you start to think about foreign policy, you're missing the point. And what I would suggest to all of you is, look, we're in World War III already. The Chinese do business the old-fashioned way. They buy it. And they have bought a lot of people in this country. And if we don't wake up soon, you're going to see, as we saw, the Songs, movie is a great opportunity. There's a movie in Taiwan about to come out, a series called 0 Day, which looks at what would happen in Taiwan if there was an invasion. And the sponsors, under pressure from the Communist Party, are delaying it so that the recall election isn't effective. And my reaction is, you have to look, if you really want to understand what the Chinese operate like, read Sun Tzu. It's warfare across the board, information, human, and space.
And if I could give a shameless plug, add 9 commentaries on the Chinese Communist Party to the list. Ambassador Braunbeck, if you can hear us, we'd love to bring you into the discussion. We'll check signal here.
Yes, I can hear you just fine. And I wish I were there, and if it wasn't for weather and 5 hours sitting in the airport last night, I would be there.
Thank you so much. We hear you just fine. Ambassador, you have seen how authoritarian regimes export repression across borders. You've been at the tip of the spear both during your time as a civil servant and post right now. What does the persecution of Falun Gong reveal about the nature of the Chinese Communist Party? And what threat and cause do we need for concern about the transnational criminal element of this persecution reaching into the United States?
I think what it reveals is the great fear the Chinese Communist Party has of Falun Gong. And I've wondered about this honestly for years, because I've worked with Falun Gong people for 20, 25 years now, in different capacities. And the Chinese Communist Party just loathes this institution, this group. They hate them, and they treat them worse than anybody. And that's really saying something, because the Chinese Communist Party treats all religions poorly. But I think what it amounts to is that they fear the most Falun Gong. The greatest threat to the Chinese Communist Party is religion. And the religion that is the most natural to the Chinese people is the Falun Gong. You've already heard that on this stage. I'm in Kansas right now, and it's like if you throw wheat on the soil in Kansas, it just grows. It's natural. And Falun Gong is very natural to China and the Chinese mentality and the Chinese heart. And I think that's why the Communist Party so fears and does everything it possibly can to stomp out this faith. And they won't get it done because it's a physical man attacking a spiritual entity. It's the kingdom of man against the kingdom of God. And it won't succeed. You can cause a lot of harm in the process. The final point I would make here is that I think we as the United States government need to be very supportive of all faiths' right to freely practice their faith wherever they are, religious freedom for everybody, everywhere, all the time. And particularly in China, we need to be supportive of the Falun Gong movement of all faiths, of Christians, of Muslims, of Buddhists, everybody, but particularly the Falun Gong because of their incredible importance to changing China, to getting it back to be the cultural beauty and free society, or freer society, and a free society that it can be, and a great contributor to the world instead of the most really oppressive regime in the world today, and the one that's killed more of its own people than any regime in the history of mankind.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. Mr. John, to the Ambassador's point about the CCP fearing Falun Gong the most, there have been reports that when American diplomats meet with CCP officials, Falun Gong is the third rail. If the topic of Falun Gong is mentioned, they get up and they walk out of the room. Is there truth to that? And how does that translate into how they have targeted Falun Gong on American soil?
I really like the term transnational terrorism and criminal organization. I think that's an accurate description of what's going on. Let's look at different aspects. First, look at social media, how they weaponize our free media platforms. I remember I saw a report by Professor Gary King of Harvard. His research team found out in 1 year alone, the CCP posts 450 million fake news, fake social media posts. And that was quite a few years ago. And now, as they have escalated, and they utilize the mainstream, some of the mainstream media and the social media platform, and to spread fake news and fake posts. Mostly this is against Falun Gong, because of the significance of Falun Gong, as Ambassador Brownback just mentioned. And then you have they even use Falun Gong's practitioner name, or using different celebrity name, the fake ID to send different kind of emails. Now they have escalated to send like a terrorist, terrorism threats, like bomb threat and the email threats, as you noticed, and Chris Miller also noticed that is so rampant. For the Shenyang performing arts alone, they received over 160 emails, death threats. So they really use the social media platform. We cannot post anything in Chinese media, right? In Chinese social media, internet, because it's the internet, not the internet. So from the legal side, we know for the first time, we have foreign nationals with the CCP ties file civil case against American company actually. This is unheard of. I came to the country in 1984 when President Reagan was running against Lonsdale for presidential election. Back then, there was a Cold War between Russia, Soviet Union, and also the NATO, the Western democracies. It's unimaginable to see a Russian, former Soviet Union, backed individuals, foreign nationals, to file civil case in the United States court against an American entity, American company. But this is happening today. So the CCP is really weaponizing our legal system to do that here. And also, if you look at the our academic society, you know very well, we have Confucius Institute here, who is funded by China and propagated CCP propaganda. I remember when I became the guest scholar at the Stockholm University, the Nordic Confucius Institute tried to undermine my academic, fellowship there, and try to say that I'm not qualified or whatever. So they are everywhere, and here in the United States we have many of them, and some of them changed to a different name. They still trying to undermine the American liberty and freedom. I really think right now what we're facing here, what Falun Gong community is facing in the United States is really a matter of national security. Our liberty, our constitutional rights is being undermined. Our American companies, cannot exercise their rights without fear. So this is something that really scary. And then we have, free speech and the free belief, freedom of conscience, all being challenged and undermined by what's the CCP's influence operations here. So we really should, take a real concrete action. I really applaud, as Congressman Harris, suggestion that we really should criminalize them and, prosecute them here.
So unfortunately, this panel is too short because there was so much to really dive into. But we are coming up against the hard stop for us. We are almost out of time. I do want to go around the panel. We'll start with Ambassador Brownback. If you could just tell the audience if there's one thing you'd like the audience to remember today or act upon, what would it be?
Keep strong, and my suggestion actually would be to get Secretary Rubio, Vice President Vance, and President Trump to meet with Falun Gong leaders or people that have been persecuted and highlight the importance of Falun Gong for freedom in China. I think our top leadership needs to be meeting with Falun Gong members and broadcasting that around the world and into China in particularly, showing our support for them like we did for the Solidarity movement in our Cold War effort, and backing Pope John Paul when he said in Poland, "Be not afraid." And when he did, that changed the mentality in Poland. This can change the mentality in China.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. Congressman?
I think my message would be that evil is ever present, evil never stops, evil never sleeps, so you must be diligent, you must be committed, and you must never stop as well. We must fight for our God-given rights every single day to preserve them and to expand them around the globe, because there are those, and of course the Communist Party in China is preeminent, that seek to take them, not only from the people in China, they seek to be the world's leader and export their terrorism and their tyranny everywhere, including right here. And so it starts right here, and it continues every moment of every day all around the globe. So be diligent.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. John?
I believe that because Falun has become global, it's been practiced over 100 countries and with over 50 languages being translated. So it's not just a concern for Chinese people. It's really an issue that concerns the entire humanity. When innocent, peaceful, the largest persecution today, happening in China. History will look very kindly at those who side with history. It's justice, and we should continue our effort, and hopefully, the collective, compassion and support, and the people like you, on the panel. I believe the victory will be inside us.
Thank you for that, Mr. John. Professor Destro.
Well, two things. Let's stay together and share information like we're doing today. Because once you start connecting the dots, you see just how pervasive it is here. So the first piece is put your own face mask on first, and then help the people around you. And the second one is let's get Starlink into China.
And we'll be in back for the round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that incredible panel on U.S. countermeasures. I wasn't asked by Steve, but I would also want to say, the CCP is fighting a losing war. It's a physical war against a spiritual group. It's physical versus spiritual, and spiritual will always win. As we close, on behalf of the organizers, I would first like to thank everyone for coming. Special thanks to Representative Perry's office and his team for reserving this space. Without him, none of this would even be possible. To all of our speakers and guests, and also the courageous Chinese individuals who successfully renounced the CCP today, thank you so much for your courage to expose transnational repression. Lastly, I would also like to thank the Capitol Police, who I'm sure you guys have seen walking around here, for helping us maintain security and safety at this event. So please, big round of applause for all of those.